Leslie Kaminoff is a yoga educator inspired by the tradition of T.K.V. Desikachar, the son of the famous T Krishnamacharya, and one of the world's foremost authorities on yoga for healing. Leslie is the co-author of the book Yoga Anatomy, which is used today by many yoga teacher training courses with over 1 million copies sold. Leslie is the founder of the Breathing Project, a community of educators committed to enriching their one-on-one work with yoga students and clients. With over 4 decades of experience in the fields of yoga and breath anatomy, Leslie has led workshops for many leading yoga associations, schools, and training programs worldwide. Leslie has actively participated in the ongoing national debate regarding certification standards for yoga teachers and yoga therapists. You're listening to Pure Yoga Talk from Austin, Texas, and I'm your host, Jeff Chen. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Leslie Kaminoff.
I'm thrilled to be joining you.
All right. And we're here on Zoom. So like you've adapted to the new kind of world of delivering yoga content and education content. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, it's not new to us. We've had online courses being offered for the last 14 or so years. So we were kind of early adopters in putting our educational content online for
That's right.
people around the world.
That's right. You're pioneers,
Mhm.
as you were, right, from the very beginning. I love to ask highly respected and yoga teachers and all these pure yoga talks about your own personal yoga path.
Uh,
So tell us, Leslie, about your first yoga teacher, your first yoga class, and what made you come back for more.
what made me come back for more was to replicate the experience I had at the end of my first class in Shavasana. I think a lot of people can relate to that. The fact that at the age of 20, for the very first time in life, I experienced something that I can now call intentional relaxation, which is different than lying down at the end of the day when you're tired and falling asleep. And so that's what got me hooked. And it was at the Shivananda Yoga Center here in New York in the year 1978. So I was 20. And I had been invited to that class by my father, who had been studying yoga there for a while. And that's what got me started, and that's what got me hooked. And by that next summer of '79, I was in my first yoga teachers training course up in Canada, which is where the worldwide headquarters for Shivananda Yoga is.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that. And so Shivananda Yoga Center, they also have one in the Bahamas. Is that correct?
They have the retreat on Paradise Island in the Bahamas. I was on staff there for a while. They have centers all over the world. It's
Okay.
probably the organization which at this point in history has trained more yoga teachers than any other, I would think.
Wow. Okay. And in India, where would they be kind of headquartered?
I don't know. I mean, the main ashram in India is in Kerala, in the south,
Oh, that's right.
north of Trivandrum, at a place called Nair Dam, and there's a
Okay.
beautiful ashram there. And I was on staff there for a little over a month in January of 1981, and that's where I became a swami. I took sannyas, it's called, which was being initiated into this order of renunciation. It didn't last particularly long in my case, but I was very, very serious at the time, and that's what got me sent to Los Angeles in the spring of 1981 to be the director of the center there, which at the time was in West Hollywood.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that about you. So it's like that's what I love about these yoga talks is that we get to discover more and more about like your early days and your early experiences. So tell us a little bit more about Desikachar, the creator of the Vinny yoga style,
Yeah.
and regarded as one of your primary influences. When did you first meet him, and how did your relationship develop and grow?
I first met him in 1988, in the summer of 1988, in upstate New York at Colgate University. And I had already been teaching yoga for the better part of a decade at that point. And uh, that experience of meeting him and encountering not just him as a person and the way he taught, but the techniques, in particular, his orientation to breathing, had a very profound effect on me. At first, it was a very disruptive effect, because breathing is taught a certain way in most every yoga tradition, other than his, in terms of the directionality of breath and the emphasis of the connecting of the breath to the way that we move, the spine, and all of that. It was all very unique and, as I said, disruptive to the way I had been taught and the way I had been teaching. So it was there was a period of many months during which time my whole system had to, in essence, reboot, from the way I had been breathing myself and the way I wanted to teach breathing to others. And that was from the summer of 1988 all the way into 1989 and the rest of the following years, where I made it my business to be wherever he was when he was teaching in the States.
Oh, wow. So, because Desikachar was a son of Krishnamacharya and was in that lineage of teachers, right, with Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois, Desikachar, and Indra Devi.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that lineage of yoga teaching differed from the Shivananda um,
Uh,
techniques in that sense.
yes, there's a number of fundamental differences between a teaching lineage that is comprised of householders. I mean, everyone that you named uh, was a householder, meaning, they were living in the world. They had families, husbands or wives, children. They had to earn a living. Shivananda is a lineage that's rooted in a renunciate line of teachers, meaning they're swamis. They have a different philosophical and practical orientation to the teachings than someone like Desikachar or his father, who had to find ways to support his family, and it's reflected in the philosophy as well as the practices.
I see. Wow. I'm looking at Sam. She's really enjoying this conversation, right?
Well,
So
ask
any
Sam to chime in with questions at some point if she has them. I'm happy to.
okay. All right. So can you share any other influences, other teachers that have helped along the way or guided along the way?
Oh, sure. Because I've worked parallel to my work in yoga, almost from the beginning, was this work in sports medicine and body work and learning anatomy. And so, you know, one of my first strong influences was my boss at the International Sports Medicine Institute, where I worked when I was living in Los Angeles. When I left Shivananda, I went to work there. And so that was Leroy Perry, who is a chiropractic orthopedist and the founder of the International Sports Medicine Institute. And I got to be a fly on the wall during that really sort of important creative time in that field in the early to mid 80s in Los Angeles, because the Olympics were coming and the whole fitness industry was just sort of becoming an industry at that point.
Mhm.
And so I got to be part of that. And then when I left LA and moved back to New York, I worked for an osteopath who was very much involved in dance medicine, a man named Richard Backrack. Um, I had a bodywork teacher who I learned the manual skills from, who's no longer with us, um, Craig Benedict Nelson. Um, and so at a certain point, I began assembling all of this into a private practice that I developed in bodywork and yoga, and very much all of it bound together by my interests and experience as a yoga teacher and my focus on breathing. Um, in subsequent years, I started a place called the Breathing Project here in New York and worked alongside Amy Matthews, who's my co-author in the book, Yoga Anatomy. And so she had a tremendous influence on my perspective and just the way that I was thinking about yoga and anatomy and the methods of analysis we had to develop in order to write the book were really a very powerful influence on how I communicate about yoga and teaching in general. Also, I have to mention Gil Headley, who ran the cadaver labs, where I did the dissecting work, and he was a very influential teacher in the way that I think about the body and the way he dissects. And that's turned into, at this point, this KNM Labs, where KNM stands for Kaminoff, Nemitz, Mann. You know two of those initials because you know Lydia Mann, my partner, and Lori Nemitz is someone who is a very experienced anatomy and movement and yoga teacher who also is a very advanced dissector. And so we run these labs together now, where people come in and can do the week-long anatomy dissection experience.
Wow, that's amazing. We are actually going to meet Gil Headley next week. He's on tour.
He is. He's doing the nerve tour right
The
now.
nerve tour. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we're going to see him next week.
He'll say hi to me.
We'll do.
Yeah, he's one of my dearest friends and a strong influence on all of these things for sure.
I see. So it seems clear that all of the wealth of all of your experiences with the body work and the sports medicine and the yoga and the breath work, really all culminated and connected into the book Yoga Anatomy, which you co-authored with Amy Matthews, and now it's on its third edition. What year did you publish that with Amy Matthews, and
First edition was
what inspired you?
2007 was the first edition. Second edition was 2011, and then there was a 10-year gap between that and the current edition, which we completed during lockdown, which you would think would be an ideal time to focus on nothing but getting this book done. But as it turns out, I had to battle through the post-COVID brain fog, which was not especially conducive to working on the book, but we somehow managed to get it done. What inspired the book was the publisher, Human Kinetics, because they approached me. This is very unusual. Most authors, have an idea for a book and they write a proposal and they submit it to publishers and try and get it published. On the other hand, this was sort of the opposite because Human Kinetics already had a best-selling book called Strength Training Anatomy by Frederick de Lavier. And they reached out to me because they did a web search and they saw that I had been teaching yoga anatomy courses for many years. And they said, well, can you help us produce a yoga version of strength training anatomy, in which, he takes these traditional strength training exercises and basically illustrates the muscles that are active during them. And I didn't think it could be done because yoga is not strength training. You can't say that this asana is about isolating that particular muscle group and then just draw a picture of the asana and light up that muscle group, because that's just not how asana works. And I still can't really recall what made me write up a proposal after having told them that I don't think it could be done. But to my surprise, they accepted the proposal and I got the contract, and then I had to find an illustrator, and then I had to figure out a method of analysis, which I was incapable of doing. So I went to Amy, who was capable, and the book somehow got done. And it was a struggle, and we blew many deadlines for that first edition. But we somehow in fact, we shipped the final corrections to a paper printout of the original manuscript on the second day of a lab we were doing with Gil Headley. I had to go to the shipping dock of the medical college in New Jersey where the lab was happening and make sure it got on the FedEx truck because it had to be in Chicago the next day.
Oh my
Otherwise, the
goodness.
final drop dead deadline would have also been blown. Um, so that connection between the book and Gil Headley and that cadaver lab and the shipping dock of the medical school are all forever connected in my mind.
That's amazing. And that's a great story. And the Yoga Anatomy book is such a staple in yoga teacher trainings. I know we use it for hours. And
Yeah.
even though we do mostly a Bikram styled teacher training, but we love the illustrations. They're so useful. It's so adaptable to no matter what style of yoga that you practice, they're so fundamental. A lot of these come from the Ashtanga. From my experience practicing Ashtanga
Mm.
yoga comes a lot from looks a lot like that, right?
Well, sure. But the thing is, Amy has studied a variety of styles, and at the time we were writing the book, she was very actively taking Bikram classes in New
Oh,
York, and so that was part of her perspective, and that went into the poses that we selected. We wanted it to be as universally applicable to as many styles of yoga as possible. And so that definitely was an influence because
oh,
she was actively practicing Bikram. Well, I would say unbranded Bikram
yeah.
yoga. What you know that whole
I know what you mean.
yeah. So, but it was basically those the Bikram
Got it.
sequence he was doing. So that went into some of the selection of the poses. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you were teaching anatomy and yoga trainings and all that, before the book. And why do you think yoga anatomy and an understanding of it really matters to a yoga teacher? Some people feel it's not that important. It's like, oh, here's a pose, do the pose, and then the pose will inform you on what's happening. And what do you think the importance of studying the anatomy?
Um, I think it's important if you think it's important. You
Mm.
know, I'm not here to evangelize about how every yoga teacher should have, an advanced understanding of anatomy. I mean, I fought to get as many as 20 hours into the standards when we were creating them in the first place. 20 hours of anatomy is part of the Yoga Alliance standard, and it's gone up to 30 at this point. I originally pushed for 25, and I thought it was 25, and then I found out later someone had knocked it down to 20. Um, so, in within that sort of understanding that a basic knowledge of anatomy is considered to be an essential part of how a yoga teacher gets trained, I would say it's really more about having a perspective on the body that grounds your practice and the way you teach your practice in the reality of what the body can and cannot do.
Mhm.
You know, and anatomy offers, I would say, a very useful lens through which we can look at what we're trying to accomplish in a physical practice. Um, because anatomy, and we go into this in greater depth in the third edition because we wrote a new chapter called Anatomy is a Story. Um, and it is. It's a story that's told by a sharp instrument because the word itself, the word anatomy means to cut up. Because a tome is a sharp instrument like a knife or a scalpel. And so when we accept that anatomy is a story we tell about ourselves through the use of a sharp instrument that divides this thing from that thing, that allows us to distinguish this from that. That's a perspective. And it's not just about memorizing body parts and attachments and actions. I think it's more about understanding that whenever we experience ourselves, it's through some kind of a lens, through some kind of a perspective. And anatomy is one of those lenses. It's a powerful lens because in yoga, the lens, the scalpel isn't really the sharp instrument we use so much as our mind, our attention, our consciousness
Mhm.
is another way of going into our body in an incisive way. Um, and when we do that, when we use our consciousness as the sharp instrument, then the more we penetrate our inner experience, the more alive we become. The
Mhm.
more you use a scalpel in a lab, the more you're cutting into the body and the less it starts looking like it looked when it was alive.
Body. Mm.
And so both are useful and both are interesting, but I wouldn't say that it's absolutely essential for someone to be a good yoga teacher, because there are some excellent teachers who don't care about anatomy, and I think that's
Yeah.
that's fine as long as they are paying attention to the results of these experiments.
Mm.
In which case, I would say it's a kind of anatomy because you're using your consciousness to go into, to cut into yourself in a certain way.
Love that.
Yeah.
Wow, it's amazing. So let's move on to something else. Let's talk about the breathing project. And so the breathing project is a community of educators committed to enriching their one-on-one work with students and clients. In a way, this is an extension of Desikachar's work.
Well, it's an extension of my work as
Okay.
inspired by Desikachar. The Breathing Project used to be a physical studio here in New York from 2003 until 2017. So that those 14 years, Amy and I together um, uh, ran this studio and taught our courses and made it a home for a variety of other kinds of programming and practitioners. And so when I closed the studio's programming in 2017, the Breathing Project, as a nonprofit educational corporation, continued um, as the like when I come to Austin and teach next month, it'll be under the umbrella of the Breathing Project.
Right.
Wherever I show up to teach, it's under the nonprofit mission of the Breathing Project. It also is an online platform that people can subscribe to, where videos of a lot of these workshops end up being posted, where all kinds of educational content, including some of the podcast episodes that I put together called Clinical Corner, get posted. And so it's basically a way for people to connect with me and with the educational material that we're generating. There's so much that's happening on Zoom these days, and so much of it is being recorded, that it seemed that there needed to be a place where all of that could be made available for people to learn from. And so it became that as well.
Okay. Great. Well, we'll look forward to having you here in Austin in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be exciting, right? So it's always great to have like really influential senior seasoned teachers like you come in and share your knowledge with the younger teachers of today, right? So I think an interesting subject is segue to the next.
Yeah.
The state of modern yoga, right? Modern yoga, and when I say that, modern yoga, like in the West, outside of India
Yeah.
for the most part. And modern yoga seems to be like it's evolved, so that's like dominated by yoga classes.
Mhm.
Many of them, like a Bikram series or an Ashtanga series, is a set sequence of postures, right?
Sure.
And quite the opposite of the one-on-one teaching
Mhm.
that was more so traditional and more so in how they do it in India. What are your thoughts on this current evolution?
Well, there is some precedent, particularly in Krishnamacharya's tradition, for group training in asana. Back in the days of the Mysore Shala, where Krishnamacharya was sponsored by the Maharaja, there were groups that got together and were trained as a group with, a fairly well-defined sequence of postures and movements connecting them. And out of that, of course, emerged the Ashtanga Vinyasa style that Pattabhi Jois became the main proponent of. So it's not like the whole idea of group classes didn't or never existed in India. And there's other traditions where that was the case as well. There's a Rishikesh tradition, which is more connected with my original training, the Shivananda training, where at the ashram in Rishikesh, there were, periods of group practice where everyone was doing their asana. And that's very much been, transported to the West by the Shivananda and other organizations that are influenced like that. I think what really, I just had this question earlier today in one of our monthly Zooms that we do with our online students about, styles of yoga and how they evolved in the West. And I think that there's like, if you imagine like a three-dimensional axis of, XYZ axes, right? So like within this sphere of how yoga shows up anywhere in the world, but in particular in the West, you can have like let's say a horizontal axis of a lot of movement here and a lot of stillness here. Like you spend a lot of time in one position during this class here, and you spend a lot of time moving here, right? And then let's say intersecting it at right angles is another axis where the main focus is on your body, on the physicality of what you're doing, or even the cosmetic results that you're going to get, as well as the health results. You're going to get a firmer butt or more toned abs or whatever, like that. I seem to have gone out of focus. Let me see if I can.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Okay. Sometimes my camera's autofocus goes a little wonky. Anyway, it'll snap back.
Yeah.
So you have a very physical focus on one end of this axis and a very, let's say, spiritual, mind, body, emotions kind of focus at the other end of that axis, right? So you have movement, stillness, body, spirit, right? And then the vertical axis there, you could say is, is it very individually taught or is it group taught?
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yes.
So imagine a dot that exists somewhere in this sphere, that identifies your tradition. Let's say a Bikram class. It's very physical, okay? You spend a little more time in the poses than moving between them.
Yeah.
Right. So you're going to be on the still side of the physical axis, and it's usually done in a group.
Right.
So the group is, so your dot would be up here on the let's say the physical stillness side of that sphere, right? So you can, if you just picture any style or any way that yoga can be taught, it's going to be somewhere in that sphere.
In that sphere.
Name of the sphere, right?
Yeah.
If it's going to be named yoga, I would say, from my perspective, the sphere that encloses all of it is called breathing.
Ah.
Because what makes it yoga as opposed to calisthenics or gymnastics or whatever? This focus thing is really annoying me. I gotta. Hello.
There you go. I see your eyes.
Oh,
there you go. That's it.
That's it. I came back. I'm not fuzzy now. So for me, in order for any of that to be called yoga, at some point, whatever you're doing, whether it's in a group or individually or stillness or movement or body focused or spirit focused, someone is going to remind you that you're breathing and that what you're doing can be connected with your breath.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a unifying thing.
Yeah. And it's, as long as you're inside that sphere that I call yoga, which to me is the same as being reminded that anything you're doing can be connected with your breath, I think it's great. And
love it.
you can imagine other axes, other than just 3 dimensions. Like maybe there's another axis that says, is this really expensive or is it being done for free? Is it commercialized or is it being offered as part of a selfless service thing where you think that if you're charging for it, it's somehow demeaning it, because there's
Yes.
attitudes that exist all along that axis. I don't think we need to limit ourselves to necessarily imagining only 3 dimensions, as many as you want. But again, there's a sphere that contains all of it, and I'm calling that yoga. And that has, for me, something to do with breathing. The advantage of being as old as I am, I'm about to turn 66, and having taught yoga in 5 decades, actually, 70s, 80s,
Yeah.
90s, aughts, actually 6 decades.
6 decades. Yes.
Geez, I didn't realize it was six. So I've seen a lot of these styles and lineages and variations really emerge into this thing that we now call the yoga industry. It didn't exist as an industry, yoga, until I would say the mid-90s.
Yeah.
Just as fitness didn't exist as an industry until the mid-80s, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I was present sort of at the nexus points of both of
Yeah.
industries emerging. So I'm very fortunate to have been witness to and contributed in whatever way I could to what it is now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of now when I'm, older, I can look back and say, yeah, these were very, very interesting times to live in.
Yeah. Wow, that was great. That was absolutely great. Let's go on to something. Let's look at advice. Okay. So given that, like what you've just wrapped around, like this whole sphere of yoga connected with one unifying concept, and that's like breath and breath connection, what advice would you give to newer yoga teachers coming out of whatever teacher training they happen to stumble upon?
Okay, sure. When you graduate from your initial 200 or whatever hours of training, give yourself a break. You're not a teacher, you're an instructor, right? And I always wanted that to be part of the initials, It's RYT from the beginning, but it should have been RYI and then RYT when you get to maybe 500. But no one ever listened to me on that one. But in all practical sense, you're an instructor, and that's what you should be. And you shouldn't expect yourself to be anything more than someone who has been given the tools to hopefully confidently stand in front of a room full of other people. Maybe it's not full in the beginning. It seldom is when you're beginning, but whatever. A room that has other people in it, other humans, and you've been given a class to teach and some words to say that will let you hopefully, in a relatively safe manner, lead them through something that will be useful to them. That will be more useful than it will be harmful.
Yeah.
It may seem like a really low bar, but what do you expect after 200 hours?
Correct.
And I think that should be part of what people are told inside these training programs. We are training you to be an instructor so that you can begin to learn how to become a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Because a teacher is someone that can actually generate a class, a sequence, words that are yours, not someone else's. Yeah. You're not going to have your own words at first because you don't have the experience, and you shouldn't expect to. So give yourself a break. Let yourself be an instructor. Do as many of those classes as you can. Pay attention. Notice how people are responding to the words that you say so that you can adjust them so that they can respond in better ways. And eventually, you'll evolve into a teacher if that's what you want. A lot of people take these courses not necessarily with the intention of becoming a teacher. Right. They just want to do it for their own enrichment, and that's a great way to do it. So I'd say, you have to digest your experience as an instructor to become a teacher, just like you have to digest a meal in order for what you've eaten to become part of your cells. You can't nourish yourself by eating, you can't nourish yourself or anyone else by eating a meal and then regurgitating it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's the same with information. It has to nourish you to become knowledge. And when it's digested and part of your cells, your knowledge can turn into hopefully wisdom after a certain period of time. But it doesn't happen all at once. It takes time, just like digestion takes time. And learning how to cook the meal so that
That's
you can
right.
serve it to someone else.
Yeah. That they would enjoy it.
Yeah.
All right.
And also, if you want to push that digestive analogy just a little bit further, a certain amount of what you eat is going to turn into crap.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you don't need it and it leaves. And
Yeah.
you don't know by looking at the plate what parts you're looking at are going to become part of you and are going to be crap in the toilet next day. And it's the same with education, you know. You have to give it a chance to
Yeah.
work its way through your system. That's as far as I want to push that analogy.
Okay. It's like anything. It's like with being a yoga student, right? And being a yoga student and a yoga teacher, like I'm just a big fan of direct experience. You have to directly experience the yoga practice itself, the breathing itself. Yeah, as a teacher, you have to just practice and have direct experience. So you're gonna sometimes hopefully you don't epically fail. And like you say, most of the time, if people leave feeling better than when they came in, then
Yeah.
you've done something for them for that day, that class.
Sure. Well, I hope everyone has at least one or two epic failures because that's part of,
Yes.
you know, I mean, there's a lot to be learned from seeing what doesn't work,
Yeah.
you know? Like ask any stand-up comedian about when they got up on stage and absolutely ate shit and bombed, you know? I mean, that's you can't make yourself vulnerable in front of a group of people that you're trying to communicate with and
Yeah.
not have the possibility of epically failing.
Mhm.
And it hurts, and it hurts to remember what it felt like, but it gets your attention,
Yeah.
and you'll learn from it. You absolutely learn from it, you
Sure.
know. And that's the last bit of advice I would say is let your students know how open you are to critical feedback, not just the praise for when it worked,
Mhm.
because that's the hardest feedback to deliver and to hear.
Right.
And we very seldom get it because people who don't like what we do, they just leave, they walk out the door, they never come back. So how do we get that feedback? We have to somehow let our students know that we're the kind of people that are open to having those uncomfortable
Yeah.
communications about what didn't work, which is why we have these surveys that we ask people to fill out. You know, then they can do it anonymously after the classes I teach. So that's how we do it. Yeah.
You know, one of the things I loved about the last time you came and visited us in Austin was your work on the feet and the gait. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed that. And actually, several months ago, I got diagnosed with a torn lateral meniscus. It comes from my
I,
martial art practice, and
oh, yeah.
and oh boy, I've been learning a lot through direct experience about about menisci and knees and ooh, it's something. It's something.
Yeah. I would be surprised that anyone who practices a martial art that involves kicking, you know,
Yeah.
like like whipping your leg at high speed, high up above your shoulder and connecting with an object
Yeah.
that doesn't at some point create
Do
a
something.
combination of flexion, extension, rotational forces in the knee that could tweak your meniscus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, but like I say, I'm learning, and
yeah,
it brought back that workshop that you did on the gait analysis and the feet, and I realized, and I looked down, and I can see that, my patterns have been. I knew I had these imbalances and these different patterns in both sides, and I haven't done anything about it, right? And so you add that up for 50 something years, 56 years, and it shows up. It shows up.
that how long you've been alive or how long you've been practicing martial arts?
Oh, 56, I'm alive. This particular martial art, 29 years. So it's taken a lot of pounding on that joint. So,
Yeah.
um,
Now, which discipline are we talking about?
kendo. So
And
kendo with sword. And so
okay.
there's a lot of loading up on the left leg. And
Hmm.
about 80 or 90% of my weight is on my left leg. And it's almost straight. And you're propelling off of that leg in a
Hmm.
most violent fashion. And
Right. So that's the move you make where you're advancing your stance,
yes,
have that lead
yes,
leg, and it's
yes,
always the same lead leg.
yes. So the
Right.
left leg is the base leg that's
Yeah.
launching
Yeah.
from, and so just the pounding of the weight on the meniscus, and it's just like just been degenerating over time.
Yeah.
Can't
Well,
change that.
for all of our lives, but especially as we age, the conversation between the feet and the knees needs to be, well, it needs to be a conversation. There needs to be communication.
Yes.
Um, because your knees are your biggest joint. It's the relationship between the two longest levers in your body. There's enormous mechanical forces that pass through the knee, far in excess of your body weight.
Yeah.
Um, and they're a very talkative joint. There's a lot of proprioceptive information that's constantly being generated by the knees, and your feet have to be able to listen to that communication and respond with um, resilience and adaptability. And unless we have that fine-tuned communication and connection with all of the layers of musculature and movement that can happen within the foot and through the foot, then we're basically screwed. I mean, I have some deeply arthritic knees myself. I've had meniscectomies on both knees.
Mhm.
And I have bone on bone going on, especially in my left knee. And if my feet had not been trained to do what they can do in response to what my knees are communicating, I would have had to have, especially my left knee at this point, replaced long ago.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
when orthopedists look at my X-rays and I tell them what I do, which is play basketball and ride my bike and whenever I can manage it, get on a horse. They're surprised that I can do all those things and not be in constant pain.
Mhm.
I'm in occasional pain, and the pain tells me my feet need to be doing something different.
I see.
Yeah.
Mhm. Well, so with your workshops that you on the road now, you're back on the road, right? COVID was sort of a lockdown, and you learned to do a lot of these things over Zoom, right? Some of these workshops. But now that you're back on the road, what are your more popular workshops, and what are your favorite ones to do?
Let's see. Well, a popular one that I teach as a session in almost every location I arrive is the Warrior Series, which is a way of showing people how to do a strong, flowing vinyasa kind of a practice without putting any body weight on their upper extremities, which is difficult for people to imagine because the standard way to get from one pose to another in vinyasa practice is to go through a salutation, which involves a lot of down dog and chaturanga and up dog and things like that. Bikram, the Bikram sequence doesn't involve a lot of upper body support.
No.
So people aren't generating a lot of the sort of wrist or problems or the sort of exacerbation of repetitive stress injuries they may have from devices or other things they're doing with their hands. So that's a popular one. I love teaching the Om workshop, which is
Oh,
more about sound and vocal production and treating sound production as like an asana practice for the mouth and for the vocal mechanism. And I like that I'm actually able to teach the Om workshop because during COVID and my COVID recovery, my breathing and my voice and all of that took a really big hit. So
oh,
the fact that I can now travel to other places and use my voice enough and my breath be available enough to teach the Om workshop is a fun thing.
Great.
The other ones that I think people find useful and have been popular are I do teach an arm support, like reimagining arm supports, because the way that these things are cued in a lot of teaching language is not particularly useful, and it doesn't acknowledge the actual pathway of weight from the hand to the spine, which has to pass through here, not through the back of your body. People are always messing around with their scapula in some attempt to create a pathway of support in the arms, and it doesn't work very well. And so reimagining all of that is a very useful thing, I think, for the way a lot of people practice. And the other one really is reimagining alignment. It's called that because the whole way that alignment is understood in yoga teaching circles needs reimagining, because asanas don't have alignment. They're taught as if they do, but they don't. People have alignment, and that's a very different concept. And so that turns into some really interesting and I would say challenging conversations for people, because the whole conceptual basis for what alignment is can be not useful, can actually, in my view, be wrong, philosophically wrong, can be intrinsically wrong. Because when we understand that asanas don't actually exist, apart from the person doing them, that turns the conversation in a whole other direction. So that's a fun, interesting, and challenging workshop to teach, which has also proven to be pretty popular.
Wow. I think I saw in one of your newsletters something about one of the common cues that you don't like, which is like square your hips or
Squaring the pelvis, yeah.
squaring the pelvis.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Is that something that you've seen kind of roll around and become sort of the part of the vernacular that is alignment based when it maybe is not, should not be?
Yeah, those kinds of cues are responsible for a lot of I would say ongoing uh, injury that people are experiencing in their hip joints and possibly the sacroiliac joints. Um, so yeah, the asking for all of the movement. Let's say when you're in a stance and you want to be doing warrior one and your pelvis is being asked to turn towards the front or squared off to the front, okay, and trying to get all of that to come from the pelvis. It virtually coincides with my definition of unhealthy movement, which is too much movement from too few places repeated too many times. And if you understand that that's my definition of unhealthy movement, and it's not just my definition, that's essentially the definition of repetitive stress injuries,
I
right?
see. Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't make that up. I'm just using those words to describe repetitive stress injuries. Too much movement from too few places repeated too many times. If you understand that, then you understand what my definition of healthy movement is. It's exactly the opposite of every term in that sentence.
Yeah.
Because my definition of healthy movement is a little bit of movement that comes from a lot of places, repeated a reasonable number of times.
Okay.
Because you can overdo anything, in small doses, something that's a healthy movement, in larger doses, can become injurious. And so I did not make up that definition either. That actually came from Amy Matthews, who got it from body mind centering, which is a little bit of movement in a lot of places. Or in other words, well-distributed movement is healthy, not overburdening too few joints with all of the movement. And the squaring of the pelvis, to me, is sort of the poster child for that way of cueing movement that I consider to be unhealthy.
I see. It's an honor, for me and a privilege to be here, to be able to talk to you in this and to have this private conversation. It's really just it's fascinating, just how much I've learned in this short conversation. And I sincerely wish you the best. We look forward to seeing you when you come back here in Austin.
Always looking forward to coming back to Austin. We love Austin. Lydia was going to Austin long before I was because she was part of the early days of South by Southwest Interactive
Oh,
as a web professional. Uh,
okay.
and we like to check in with all our friends, and
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll go get some good
Get
barbecue.
some good barbecue for sure. All right. So we've got so Leslie Kaminoff, everybody, the teacher of teachers in Austin, Texas, and we look forward to seeing all of you there.